It was a quiet evening, the calm stronger than usual. Raindrops tapped against the windows, and in the distance there was a rumble of thunder. In the room, Emma sat alone on the bed, her mood just like the storm outside. The room was dark, with only a single light shining on his face. He stared blankly at his phone and casually scrolled through social media, trying to stop himself from browsing the irrelevant messages that had become so popular. Emma expected nothing from anyone. Today, it is rare to see him. His life was boring, the days passed quickly, and nights like this would only make him lonelier. Yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, he couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was unusual. I heard a sound in the air, closer. It wasn't a storm, or shadows dancing on the walls. It was something else, something he couldn't tell what. 44, and then it happened. A loud knock on the door broke the silence and Emma jumped. His heart was pounding as he turned off the TV and looked at the door on the other side of the room. The knock on the door came again, slow and cautious, and he shouted loudly from his chest. "It's almost midnight. Who will come this time?" For a moment, Emma decided to ignore it. After all, it was nothing, a joke, a mistake, a windfall. But the knocking continued, hard and insistent, as if the person on the other side knew they were there. Possibilities raced through his mind. Is it difficult? Is your roommate missing? Is it worse? He didn't know whether to feel scared, angry, or surprised. He sighed, stood up, and walked to the door on unsteady legs. A hand touched the door and he held it motionlessly. Open? Every instinct told him not to do it, but the knock on the door made him go, as if an invisible force was urging him to see who, or what, was waiting outside. Emma looked at the hole, but her wandering mind couldn't find it. The balcony lights flickered in the rain, casting ominous shadows across the empty space. No one. Yet he did not shrink from the thought that someone, or something, was watching him, waiting for him to disappear. There was another knock on the door, soft this time, almost gentle. This gave him the chills. Emma swallowed, her heart filled with fear and desire. Everything outside the door disturbed his lonely night's work. Whether he's ready or not, his life is about to change forever. For the past 6 months, he had been her best friend. The day his mother died, life changed dramatically. It wasn't just sadness, it was the emptiness that followed, the silence that filled every part of her life. Emma had always been close to her mother. They shared everything, late-night conversations, Sunday breakfasts, and dreams for the future. But when cancer had taken her mother, a part of Emma had been taken too. She tried to hold it together, continuing as if it were normal. But it's no longer possible. The powerful woman who was rock music, its leader, and its best musician is gone. Life without her, Emma retreats into her own shell, shutting out her friends, ignoring her phone, and avoiding places that remind her of happy times. Her only escape is work. She spends her days burying herself in work, immersing herself in work to keep her mind off the pain. But even that was a bad problem. The evening was the hardest. Coming home to an empty house, eating alone, and lying awake in the dark, it all felt like an endless loneliness. Her mother's house, as it was now, was a reminder of what she had lost. The family photos on the walls, the sweet scent of her mother's favorite lavender candle, and the light trails in the curtains, all of it pointed to a life that was past, but it was impossible. Emma decided to collect everything, to make the house a museum of memories. But every time she tried, she couldn't. Letting go of the past was like letting go of her mother. Emma's friends tried to help at first. They told her to go, sent messages and told her they were there if she needed anything. But Emma didn't know how to explain her condition. How did they know how serious her illness was? Gradually, the invitations stopped coming, and the messages became fewer and fewer. She didn't blame them. People moved on. It was natural. But for Emma, moving on seemed impossible. She spent her night scrolling through old photos on her phone, listening to voicemails her mother had left, and replaying the stories in her head. Sometimes she would talk to her mother, hoping her words would be heard. Sometimes she would sit in the quiet, letting the weight fall on her. Despite the turmoil that had befallen her, There was a part of Emma that wanted change. She didn't know what it would be like or how it would happen, but deep down, she hoped for something, anything, that could help her escape. Little did she know that hope would soon be answered. The knock on the door in the middle of the night is not just a knock. It is a fire, an explosion, a wall she has built around herself. Although she doesn't know it yet, opening this door will be the first step on a journey that will force her to face her fears, uncover hidden truths, and rediscover the powers she had forgotten. Emma's life is on the verge of change, and a stranger stands at the door, someone she could not have foreseen. The applause continues, echoing throughout the room. Emma stood still, her hands still flapping in front of the door. She could feel her heart beating wildly in her chest, each beat louder than the last. The rational part of her brain screamed at her to stop caring. Time would pass, and everyone would knock on the door for no reason. Yet there was something else here, deliberate, almost intentional. He grabbed the doorknob, but didn't turn it. Instead, he moved closer and put his ear to the door. He held his breath, trying to hear any sound from the other side. There was nothing. Outside, the storm had died down, and raindrops pattered softly on the windows. But there was no sound beyond that. No returning footsteps, no muffled voices, no sign that anyone or anything was there. Fear seeped into his bones. He was not a coward, but the silence made him so. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was 12:03. A moment when the world seemed quiet and uninhabitable, a strange connection between the end and the beginning. Here it was again. This moment was more subtle, almost cruel, as if he knew, he thought, that someone, or something, was on the other side of this mouth. The voice disturbed him. He took a few steps back, his mind racing. Should he call the police? Write to your neighbor? But what exactly does he say? Someone knocked on my door, but I couldn't see them and I didn't know who it was. His hand reached for the cell phone on the hallway table, but he stopped. Something inside him stopped him from calling. To be fair, it's not fear. It's something else. Curious. Is there a strange, inexplicable desire to open the door and see who's inside? Either way, it was stronger than his instinct to back away. He sighed and went back to the door. The view from the outside was distorted and obscured by old glass, but the entrance seemed empty. No shadows, no movement. Only the dim light of the street lamp shone through the rain. He felt a wave of darkness. What kind of trick is that? Are you a teenager looking to shake up the neighborhood? Did you think so? No, that scream is true. He was very knowledgeable. He tried his best and put his hand on the doorpost again. He slowly turned the knob and the metallic click was louder than expected. His wrist clenched as the door opened a few inches. He looked out into the night, examining the darkness. The rain clouded her vision, and for a moment she could see nothing. Then her eyes caught movement. Beyond the reach of a porch light is a shape half hidden in the shadows. Emma stopped breathing. The figure watched her without moving. I couldn't understand the information. What I saw was the frail appearance of a tall, broad-shouldered man. Whoever it was, he didn't move, he didn't speak, as if waiting for the first move. Emma's voice was shakier than I expected. "Who is this?" she cried, her words washed away by the rain, swallowed by the night. No answer. He took the side of the door, his mind a whirlwind of questions. Why don't they talk? Why are they standing? At last the figure moved and approached the moon. Emma gasped quickly at the sight of the stranger. He was an old, haggard, sharp-eyed man who looked like he'd been stabbed. He was soaked from the rain, his clothes stuck to his body, but he stood tall and calm as if the storm didn't bother him at all. "Sorry to bother you." The man spoke in a low, strong voice. "But I need your help." Emma suffered a miscarriage. His words were simple, but they had a weight that he couldn't forget. He didn't know this man, had never met him before, but the way he looked at her, the way he spoke made him suspicious. He should have closed the door, he told her to leave, but she couldn't. 44, who are you?" he asked now in his own words. "What do you want to do?" 4444. The man smiled slightly, almost sadly. My name is Samuel, he said. I'm here because of your mother. 4444. Emma's heart stopped. His mother? How could this stranger standing on her porch in the middle of the night know about her mother? A chill ran through his body and thousands of questions flooded his mind. Who is this person? What does he want? What did his mother say that was both comforting and terrifying? He didn't know it yet, but his life had already changed in ways he could never have imagined. This is not a knock on the door, but the beginning of a journey that will uncover secrets he never knew and will change his life forever. 4444. Emma stood motionless, the door open, staring at the man in front of her, her mind racing. The rain ran down the brim of his hat and soaked his shoulders, but he didn't notice. Her eyes looked at him calmly but eagerly, as if she had been waiting for this moment without knowing it. 4444. What does my mother's mean? Emma's voice was firm, but her chest was tight. The arrival of the stranger made him uneasy, but his voice diluted his doubts like lightning. Samuel moved slightly, the soft light from the balcony casting shadows on his face. I know this sounds weird, he said quietly but firmly. I didn't expect you to believe me so quickly. But I know your mother. We were friends, for one. A long time ago. Emma's hand pressed on the door. At the mention of his mother he screamed and demanded answers. But he also wanted to listen. His mother never mentioned a man named Samuel, not in the stories she told about the past. Emma was deeply moved, dismayed, thrilled, and intrigued. I don't know you, he said hoarsely. My mother never mentioned you either. Why are you here? What do you want? Samuel hesitated, his voice hoarse. I don't blame you for asking me, he said. But I promise, I'm here because your mom wants me to be here. Look, they gave me something. I need to give you something in due time. Emma wanted to change her words. The thought that he trusted this stranger almost did. However, there was something in his voice, serious and reckless, that made it hard to dismiss him immediately. What are you saying? He asked, his voice rising slightly. What did he give you? And why now? Why did he appear in the middle of the night? Samuel put his hand in his shirt pocket, moving slowly so as not to startle him. He came out with his hand, holding a small newspaper bound in leather. He looked at Emma. He knew immediately. That's his mother. Diary has been her mother's constant companion over the years. Emma saw her notebook in the evening, the pages full of notes, drawings, and thoughts that her mother had kept in her mind. After her mother died, Emma sought him out, hoping that he could comfort and understand her mother's heart. But he was not seen. What? How? Emma's voice was sad as she looked at the magazine, her heart racing. Where did you get that? Samuel handed it to him, unable to identify it. She said, he gave it to me. Before he finished, he wanted me to keep it until you finished. His mother gave it to him? But why? And what did he mean by prepared? Questions burned in his mind, he could not form words. His hand slowly reached out, a little trembling, and he accepted it. The leather was worn and worn, the edges of the pages frayed. Holding her in his arms like he was holding a piece of his mother, connection he hadn't felt in months. He said you understood, Samuel said slowly, looking at her. When the time comes. Emma looked at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief, anger, and sympathy. This doesn't make sense, he said, his voice breaking. Why did he give you this? Who else? What do you want from me? Samuel said, his shoulders slumping slightly under the weight of her question. I know there are many things to do. But I don't want anything from you, Emma. I'm here because your mother told me to be. Because she believes you should know the truth. What truth? Emma asked, her voice sharp as her frustration and confusion reached their peak. What is the truth? Samuel refused, his eyes dropping for a moment before he met her again. Talk, he said quietly. About you. About everything. Emma felt the ground shift beneath her feet, as if the world she knew was crumbling before her eyes. She wanted to close the door, to shut out these strangers, all their questions, the heavy weight of their words. But she couldn't. Deep down, she knew that everything Samuel had come to tell her was what she wanted to hear. "Please do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let me explain." Emma held the note tightly in her hand and stared at it for a long moment. She didn't know who this man was or what he would teach, but one thing was certain, her life would never be the same again. Against her instincts, she stepped back and opened the door. "Come in," he said in a barely audible voice. And just like that, a stranger crosses the threshold, bringing with him secrets that will unlock everything Emma thought she knew. Samuel walked over, rubbed the rain on his shirt, and set him down on the chair by the door. Emma closed the door behind her, her heart still beating rapidly. The book in her hands felt heavier than it should have, as if she were holding more than just pen and paper. She ran her fingers along the edge of the cover and stared at it, trying to understand how this stranger could possibly have something special, something she thought she had lost forever. Samuel looked around the room, his eyes on the pictures on the walls. "You look like her," he whispered thoughtfully. "Your mother." "You didn't tell me who she was," he said, his voice growing harsher. "How do you know her? Why did she give you this?" Samuel turned and looked at her, his face calm but with an emotion he couldn't place, perhaps sadness, perhaps regret. "I knew your mother a long time ago," he said. "We grew up in the same small town before you were born. She is one of the smartest, most determined people I have ever met. Even as a child, she had a strong will for herself and wanted to be different." Emma blinked, taken in by his words. She had heard stories about her mother since she was a child, but nothing in detail. "He never mentioned you," she said quietly. Samuel nodded as he had expected. "She wouldn't have done that," he admitted. "Your mother kept secrets, especially things she thought would hurt the people she loved. That's why I'm here now. Because there was something she wanted you to know, something she couldn't tell you." Emma's chest heaved at his words. The sadness he had been trying so hard to bury had grown again, pressing against his side like an inescapable weight. "What is it?" he asked in a loud voice. Samuel showed the newspaper in his hand. "Everything is there," he said. "But it's not beyond his imagination or memory. This magazine is a map. It guides you to what your mother considers to be most important." Emma closed her eyes, her confusion growing. "What was the card for?" Samuel said briefly, "Actually, her life, her family, and the choices she's made over the years all played a part in this." Emma shook her head, trying to compose her words. "Why didn't she just tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you give yourself up instead of leaving me?" Samuel hesitated, his eyes softening. "She wanted to," he said. "But by the time she knew what you needed to know, it was too late. She didn't want to burden you while you were sick, and when she was gone, she asked me to make sure you got it when you were ready." Emma took a deep breath. The thought that her mother was thinking of her even in her final days was both comforting and deeply painful. She looked back at the newspaper, her thumb brushing the leather cover. "But why?" he said, looking at Samuel. "What made you decide I was ready?" Samuel gave her a small, sad smile. He said simply, "Because you are. I have always pursued you, Emma, not for satisfaction, but because I promised your mother that I would. I saw how you fought, how you were defeated. And I knew the time had come. He hoped this journal would help you find your way, and I think he was right." Emma looked at him, her emotions swirling in a whirlwind. Some of them wanted to push him away, to ask him to leave her alone with her problems and her regrets. But another part of her, searching for answers in the silence of the night, knew he was telling the truth. She was no stranger to a story. She was a lifeline, a thread connecting her to her lost mother. She sat on the chair by the fireplace, holding a newspaper like a life raft. "If that's the answer, where do I start?" she said in a trembling voice. Samuel approached, soft but firm. "Start at the beginning," he said. "Your mother left you answers. All you have to do is agree to search for them." Emma slowly opened the newspaper, the shivers stopping in her spine. The first page was written in her mother's handwriting, familiar and beautiful, but the words blocked her path. To my dearest Emma. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to guide you. But I want you to know, what is written on this page will change everything. Trust yourself and trust the journey. You are stronger than you think. Tears clouded Emma's vision as she read the words, her mother's voice echoing in her mind. As she looked at Samuel, her heart ached with a mixture of hope and fear. What happens when I run out of energy? She whispered. Samuel looked closely. He said, You. And I'll come help you, as I promised you. You don't have to do this alone. Emma swallowed, her fingers gripping the edge of the newspaper. She didn't know what was going to happen, but for the first time in months she felt something terrifying inside her, perhaps she felt it. Even though she couldn't see it, she was about to embark on a journey that would explain everything she thought she knew about her life, her family, and herself. Emma looked at the newspaper in her lap, her hands trembling slightly as she turned the pages. Each page was written in her mother's handwriting, beautiful, thoughtful, and full of emotion. It was strange, almost meaningless, to read these personal comments, but the text on the front page resonated in her mind. This is for you, Emma. Trust the journey. The next page began on a date, many years ago, before Emma was born. He calmed down and read the first. November 15, 1985. There are times in life when you make a choice that changes everything, not just for yourself but for everyone you love. Today is one of those days. I'm not saying no. I'm afraid, but I know it's the right thing to do. He turned the page, trying to find more information, but the next entry would jump back months. This was short, broken. June 3, 1986. This secret burden was heavier than I thought. There were days when I wondered if I had made the right choice. But every time I looked at it I realized something. I had to do it. I hope he'll forgive me one day. I think he'll find love after all this. Her stomach churned. Is it a secret? She looked up at Samuel, who stood quietly by the window, staring and thinking about her. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. What did she say? Samuel walked over to her, judging her. Your mother has a past she hasn't talked about, Emma, he said quietly. It was a choice to protect you, to give you the life she thought you deserved. But those choices weren't easy, and they came with sacrifices. Emma clutched the hardcover book tightly. What kind of sacrifices? She asked, her voice sharp. Is he alive? Samuel said, his interested. But he was afraid of what would happen to you. That's why he left it to you to find the right time. I don't know how he could leave me with something like that. Samuel knelt down beside her, his voice quiet but firm. He hasn't kept you from harm, she said. He did it out of love. The choices he made, the things he endured, all for you, Emma. To protect you. And now, it's time to get to know you to tell the truth. Emma looked back at the notebook, her heart pounding. He turned the pages, each page revealing a different aspect of his mother's life, happy times, scary ones, and sad ones. But it wasn't until he saw an entry written just months before his mother's death that the pieces began to fall into place. August 12, 2022. I always knew this day would come, but I never imagined how difficult it would be to prepare for it. Samuel promised to send this diary in due time. I trusted him to guide Emma, to help her understand my choices and the truth I cannot share with him. If he reads this, it means I am gone. But it also means he is ready to know everything. Emma, my sweet girl, there is a part of our story I cannot tell you. It began long before you were born and ends with the choices I made for you. Follow the path I have left for you, and you will understand why. I love you more than words can express. Tears streamed down Emma's face as she read the words. Her mother's voice, recorded in ink, felt like a lifeline from the afterlife. He wiped his cheeks, his emotions a whirlwind of sadness, anger, and longing. He knows, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. He knew it would destroy me. Samuel shook his head. He knew it would challenge you, he said. But he also believes in your strength. He believes that you are willing to face reality, even if it hurts. Emma's hand shook as she opened the page and revealed a map. The map was dirty, but detailed enough to make out a rural location not far from where Emma had grown up. The note on the page read, "The first step is here." "What is this?" Emma asked, her voice shaking. "Here you will find another piece of the puzzle," Samuel said. "Your mother left you something there. Something to help you understand." Emma stared at the map, her mind racing. Part of him wanted to close the journal, calm the storm of emotions and questions that threatened to engulf him. But another part of him, the part that had always admired his mother's courage, knew he couldn't go back now. He looked at Samuel, his jaw set in determination. "If he believes I can do it," he said in a calm voice, "then I must try." Samuel nodded, a faint smile on his face. That's what he was hoping you would say. And then Emma took her first steps on the path her mother had left behind, unaware of the truths and challenges that awaited her. The journey had only just begun, but it had already begun to reshape everything he thought he knew about himself, his family, and the woman he loved most. The map stared back at Emma, its edges faintly smudged with pencil marks and handwritten notes. The location it pointed to wasn't far, but the distance wasn't what concerned her. It was the uncertainty of what she might find. Her mother had left her a trail, puzzle to piece together, but it wasn't just curiosity driving her, it was a deep yearning to understand the woman she thought she knew so well. Emma carefully picked up the map, placed it between her books, and looked at Samuel. He stood silently, looking at her patiently, as if he understood her inner turmoil even though she hadn't said a word. "This is it," she said, holding up her book. "How did you know?" "My mother told you, didn't she?" Samuel nodded. "Yes," he said. "A few years ago. He didn't tell me the whole story, but he made it clear that this place was important. His story began here, and yours begins here, too." Emma frowned, her words. They were both incredulous, uncertain. "What's going on?" she asked. "What will I find?" Samuel refused, his eyes drifting away for a moment before meeting hers again. "That's up to you to find," he said. "Your mother doesn't want me to tell you the answers. She wants you to find them for yourself. The way you see them." He wasn't sure if he was ready, but being here, surrounded by the same walls and struggling with the same unanswered questions, was too much. If this path would bring him closer to his mother, then he had to accept it even if his mother died. "When are we leaving?" His voice was calm despite the turmoil in his heart. Samuel smiled slightly and nodded in agreement. "Tomorrow," he said. "Please rest tonight. You're going to need it." The next morning, Emma stood at the window, watching the first light of dawn break through the grey sky. She hadn't slept much. Questions, memories, and the fear of having ended up in the same place. What was bigger, though? When she saw the menu on the dinner table, she made a strange decision. His mother believed him, and for now that was enough. Samuel arrived on time, his demeanor impeccable and focused. They set off without much conversation. The weight of the task at hand seemed to weigh heavily on both of their shoulders, and the silence was fitting, almost respectful. "It will take you less than an hour to drive to the location marked on the map." All around them lay the countryside, winter grey, with rolling hills and sparse trees. Emma felt good when they reached their destination. The road wound along, leading to an old, weather-beaten farm hidden behind the trees. It looked empty, with boarded-up windows and paint peeling from the sun's heat. Yet despite its desolate appearance, the place seemed alive, as if the house still held memories waiting to be discovered. "That's it," Samuel said as he approached his car. "That's what your mother wanted you to start with." Emma stepped outside, the cold air piercing her skin as she neared the house. Her footsteps on the gravel, each step ringing in the silence. As he got closer, his heart beat faster. He couldn't explain it, but there was a pull, a feeling that this place connected to him in some way he didn't yet understand. Samuel was just a little behind him, so he could guide him. "Take it easy," he said softly. This isn't about speed. But listen to what this place has to say to you. Emma walked to the front door, hesitant. The wood was worn and cracked, the knob cold under her fingers. She pushed it open, the hinges rattling in protest. The air inside was thick with bitterness, dust and wood and a little sweet, like dried flowers. She stepped inside, her eyes fixed on the faint light that filtered through the cracks in the floorboards. The room was very simple, with paper on the furniture and cobwebs in the corners. But it wasn't the appearance of the house that attracted him, but the feeling. A strange sense of familiarity settled over him, as if he had been here before. His eyes scanned the room until they fell on a small wooden box on the fireplace. It looked strange, untouched by the dust and decay that covered it all. His heart raced as he approached it, and his hands shook slightly as he reached for the lid. Inside, he found a stack of letters bound with tape that had faded, the edges frayed from the work. The top letter was in her mother's hand, and Emma held her breath as she spoke the words written on the envelope, to Emma. As he loosened the tie, his hands shook as he untied the tape and opened the letter. The words inside are short and strong. Emma, if you are reading this, you have taken the first step and I am very proud of you. To speak. Trust yourself and trust the journey. This house is not just a memory, it is a reality. Don't be afraid to find it. All my love. Mother. Emma held the letter to her chest, tears darkening her vision. She looked around the room and felt the weight of her mother's words. Behind her, Samuel whispered. He left this place for you, Emma. Well, this is your story. Emma nodded, her mind growing stronger. Whatever the truth of this house was, she was ready to find it. For her mother, for herself, for the life she had just come to know. The house seemed to be breathing down Emma's neck, its walls bearing the weight of incalculable information. She carefully put the letter back in the box and looked around. His mother's words echoed in his mind. This house is not just a memory, it's also a reality. Samuel stood in the doorway, his eyes steady but unwavering. Don't worry, he said softly. Listen to what this place has to say to you. Emma nodded, but she didn't hear. Her heart beat fast, her mind filled with questions. She crossed the room, her fingers running over the leaf-covered furniture and dusty floors. Every step was thoughtful, as if she were leading the way through the house. Her eyes fell on the bookcase in the corner, the once shiny wood faded and scratched. She walked over, her fingers running over the spine of the book. Most were old, their titles faded, but one caught her eye. It was a small leather book, like the one her mother had given Samuel. She took it from the shelf, a cloud of dust rising, and she coughed. Emma opened the journal carefully, its pages frayed, yellowed with age. The handwriting inside was not her mother's, it was strange but rich. The first entry was written 10 years ago, before Emma was born. March 14, 1965. This house has become more than a home. It is a refuge, a secret place, a place of beginnings. I hope those who see this understand the choices we made and the sacrifices we made. Came with them. Emma's face moved and she read the text. The inscription bore the initials LH. She soon realized that she didn't know. Although the person who wrote this diary is not a mother, she seems to have a strong connection to the town. And by extension, connected to her family. Her heart pounded as she turned more pages, finding parts of the story she had not been able to piece together. The records tell the story of the family who lived in that house, the problems they faced, and the decision that led them to leave everything behind. One word stopped him dead in his tracks. June 21, 1972. We couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. He is too young to understand. But one day we will wonder where it came from and why we do what we do. Until this house holds the answers, waiting for him to find them. Emma's throat was not on the list, but the meaning could be her mother. Could this diary have been written by an ex of his mother's, someone with secrets she was afraid to reveal? He turned to Samuel and took the diary. Do you know who wrote this? He asked in a trembling voice. Samuel looked thoughtful as he approached to examine the book. I've seen it before. He accepted. Your mother showed it to me once, but she didn't really explain it. She just said it was from someone very important to her. Emma's head spun. Even though the parts didn't work, she felt the edges of a great story begin to take shape. She looked at the journal again, pausing at the last entry. The day was cloudy, but the words were clear. If you've seen this, the time has come. Look under the floorboards in the study. The answer you seek is there. Emma lifted her head, her eyes fixed on Samuel, her voice said. Samuel pointed to the narrow passage at the back of the house. It's very low there, he said. But do you know if you're ready for this? You might find unexpected answers once you open the door. Emma swallowed, clutching the paper tightly. She wasn't sure she was ready, but she couldn't stop now. Her mother left her like this, she must have seen it herself. She said in her own voice, I must say. The study was smaller than Emma had imagined, with empty bookshelves on the walls and a large, dusty desk in the middle of the room. As if the room itself was holding its breath, Emma knelt on the floor and ran her hands over the worn boards, searching for any traces of dirty flooring. It wasn't long before she saw a plank of wood in the corner of the room that lifted slightly when she stepped on it. There was a stinging sensation at the edge of her fingers, but after a moment of hard effort she finally let go of the plank. Beneath it was a small metal box, its top worn with age. Emma's heart sank as she lifted the box from its hiding place. She looked at Samuel, who was standing silently in the doorway, and he was also speechless. That's it, she said, more to herself than to him. She opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were books, photographs, and a folded letter. Emma was the first to take the letter, and her breath caught when she recognized the handwriting on the envelope. The words, "To my daughter," are boldly but carefully written. He takes out the letter and reads with trembling hands. My dear Emma, if you found this letter, then you have done what I expected of you. This house, this book, and everything. In it, part of the story I have been waiting to tell you. It is not an easy story, and parts of it may be painful, but it is about knowing where you have come from and what you have chosen to bring with you. You will come here. Don't rush, Emma. Trust yourself and trust your heart. You'll understand when the time comes. I have your attention. Mom. She looked back at the pictures and books in the box, waiting for their secrets to be revealed. The journey was over, and Emma knew she was the only survivor. But for the first time in months, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She wasn't ready to let go yet. Emma sat on the study floor, the small metal box open before her. Her mother's letter lay beside her, the words from her heart still fresh in her mind. Now her mind was focused on what was inside the box, a collection of photographs, books, and other objects that seemed to tell stories of a past she had never known. Each one seemed like a puzzle she was beginning to understand. First, she reached for the pictures, her fingers shaking as she picked them up. The top is black and white, the sides are slightly off. It shows a young girl standing in front of the house where she now lives. Her mother's hair is short, her smile is bright, and her eyes are filled with a light of joy that Emma had not seen in the years before her death. Below this photo is another, this one of her mother and someone Emma does not know. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and an arm wrapped around his mother's shoulder. Both of them seemed very happy, because of the calm atmosphere. Emma's face lit up, her mind racing with questions. Who is this person? Why didn't his mother tell him? Do you know him? Samuel's voice was soft and concerned. Emma looked up at him and shook her head. No, she agreed. I've never seen him before. Do you know who he is? Samuel hesitated, thinking about his explanation. Your mother said it once, he said. His name was James. He was a good person to her. Emma's face fell. Does it matter? She asked. Is he a friend? More than that? Samuel sighed and moved closer. More than that, he said softly. They lived together for a while, before you were born. But something happened, something left him. The mother he didn't know. He put the photos aside and looked at the papers in the box. The first document he found was a birth certificate, But it wasn't his. Her name stopped him in his tracks, Emily Harper. Her mother's name. But the information was incorrect. The town named after her was actually her birthplace, not the town her mother said she was from. Or? The certificate was written 2 years before her mother's birth certificate. What is this? Emma murmured, her voice shaking as she held the document. Why doesn't this look familiar to me? Samuel walked over to her, his face dark. Because your mother changed her identity, he said quietly. When she left this house, she left her old life behind. And he became a new man. What you are here to find, he said. There is more to this story, Emma. The answer is here, but you have to dig deep. Emma was breathing heavily, her hands digging into other papers, torn and tattered letters, which had passed between her mother and a man named J.H. James, she remembered sadly, the voice turning to fear and sadness. The vision got worse and it felt like someone was watching me. If anything happens, know that I did my part to protect him. Please understand. I will always love you. Emily. Emma looked at the letter, her heart breaking. Look at him, he murmured. Who is he trying to protect? Samuel's eyes. You are, he said simply. Emma's heart sank as she fell completely at his words. But where? Who? The questions before him were questions with answers. He looked back at the box, and his eyes fell on one last item in the corner. It was a small brass key, its surface worn with age. Emma took it, turned it over in her hand. It was marked with a single word engraved into the metal, down under. Emma looked at Samuel, her determination growing stronger. There's more there, isn't there? She asked, holding up the key. Samuel nodded. Yes, he said. But it's not easy. Even waiting in the basement. That's the gist of your mother's story. It might not be what you expect. Emma stood up, holding the keys tightly in her hands. I've come this far, she said, her voice calm despite the storm inside her. I'm not giving up now. Samuel came downstairs and told her to show him the way. When Emma reached the basement door, the atmosphere in the house began to grow even heavier. She put the key in the lock, tightening her grip as she turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow wooden staircase leading into darkness. Emma looked at Samuel, unsatisfied. Her tone was brave, but supportive. You're not alone, she said. I'll be there. Emma took a deep breath and took the first step, the old wood creaking under her weight. She descended the stairs slowly, the air growing colder with each step. The beam of her flashlight shone through the darkness, illuminating the dark corners of the basement. Then she saw it, a large box, its surface dusty but its edges shining in the light. Emma reached for the box, her heart beating rapidly. Whatever was inside was the last small remnant of her mother's past. She knelt by the door, her hand steady as she opened the lid. The sight inside surprised her. Inside the box were files, pictures, and a hardcover book. But what caught her attention most was a stack of documents with the word, confidential, written in bold letters across them. Emma took the top sheet of paper and held her breath as she read the words on the cover, Project Harper, subject, Emily Harper. This wasn't just her mother's story, it was an event that could change everything she knew about her family, herself, and herself. The air in the basement seemed even colder as Emma looked at the papers in her hands. The words, Project Harper, subject, Emily Harper, appeared faintly, coldly, and steadily on the cover. Her mother's name, her real name, was connected to something that seemed larger than either of them. Emma's hands clenched as she opened the file, the pages whispering strangely to each other, as if they did not want to reveal their secrets. On the first page was a picture of her mother, Emily. Emma had never seen such a young mother before. The picture was attached to a large sheet of paper with a few lines of small type on it. Emma's eyes scanned the pages quickly, trying to absorb the words in the book. Subject name, Emily Harper. Date of birth, March 14, 1965. Subject status, active, 1978 to 1985. Emma blinked, her thoughts confused. The status of the subject? What did this mean? She continued reading, and the next part really bothered her. Background: subject Emily Harper was selected as a candidate for the Harper Project because of her intellectual ability, physical endurance, and adaptability under pressure. Starting at age 13, subjects undergo training and assessments in a variety of areas, including, but not limited to, writing, field observations, and psychological warfare. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Training? Mind warfare? What is this? She whispered softly. She turned the page and found more information, descriptions of activities involving her mother, and missions that resembled the feel of a spy novel. As Emma tried to make sense of it all, these words came together. Samuel's voice interrupted his thoughts. Your mother was involved in something she didn't like, he said quietly. She was taken on a mission when she was young. She didn't say much, but from what I understand, it was government-related. Classified. Danger. Emma looked at him, her chest heaving. Did you know about this? She asked. Did you know that he was, what, a spy? Samuel shook his head. I don't know the details, he said. I just know that there's a part of his life that he wants to keep. When he left this house and this project, he ran away from the past. He ran to protect himself, and to protect you. Emma took the file. Why won't he tell me? She asked in a choked voice. What's the secret? Because he didn't want to expose you, Samuel said. He wants you to live a normal life, free from the shadow of what happened to him. But he also knew that one day you might have to know the truth. Emma shook her head, her thoughts confused. The next document in the file caught her attention, and she pulled it out. It was a letter written in her mother's handwriting, but the recipient's name was James Harper. James. I am writing this because I have not had the opportunity to tell you in person. You believed in this mission, but I no longer know. Not after what happened in Prague. I cannot stand this timeline. They knew the risks, they knew what they wanted from us, and I couldn't allow Emma to be a part of my life. You deserve better. So I have to go. I hope one day you'll understand. But that was another piece of the puzzle that his mother never shared. Emma grew up believing her father had abandoned her and that he didn't want to be a part of their lives. But the letter paints a different picture. This isn't about abandonment, it's about survival. James Harper, Emma whispered, looking at Samuel. That's my father, isn't it? 44. Samuel shook his head, his grave. Yes, he said. Your mother never talked about him because she didn't want to bring him into the world he was born into. She either stayed in the system or she didn't. There was a dividing line. Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes, angry, sadness and disbelief welled up in her. So, you left him. You gave up everything to protect me. He made his choice, Samuel said softly. It was the hardest thing for him, and the mother stood together, they looked young and full of energy. But now he understood the burdens they carried, the secrets they had to keep. She put the photo aside and picked up a leather book wrapped at the bottom of her bag. It was smaller than any journal he had seen before, and when he opened it he found it filled with notes written in his mother's handwriting. The addresses are fragmentary, but reveal much about her mother's life. I want to believe in the mission, in the good things we are doing. They are fighting now. It breaks my heart that James is gone, but I can't let Edmar grow up in that world. He deserves more than secrets and lies. One day, Emma will decide for herself how to face the truth. I hope she will understand why I do this. Emma closed the book, her heart heavy but her resolve firm. His mother's decision, her sacrifice, and her love for Emma weighed on him, but it also made him understand. Her mother had carried a heavy burden, now it was time for Emma to face the truth. He looked up at Samuel and clenched his teeth. I want to know everything, he said. Not just about my mother, but about the project, about my father, about everything. Samuel nodded. Then let's move on, he said. But understand this, Emma, the truth lies not only in knowing the past, but in deciding what to do with it. Emma looked at the documents and photos before her. The pieces of her mother's life began to come together, creating a picture she hadn't expected, but couldn't ignore. He took a deep breath, stealing his resolve. "I'm ready," he said, his voice calm. "Whatever comes next, I'm ready." With these words, Emma entered the next chapter of her journey, determined to uncover the whole story and face whatever truths awaited her, no matter how difficult they might be. The books, photographs, and documents laid out before Emma were like pieces of a mosaic, pieces of her mother's life that revealed something bigger, darker, and more complicated than she had ever imagined. His mother wasn't just taking part in this clandestine activity, she was the protagonist of something fraught with mystery and danger. Emma carefully sorted through the files, her fingers trembling as she put together the timeline. Harper's mother's involvement in the project had taken nearly a decade. The first book described his work, his training, and his early career. Later, the files were revealed to be even more classified, filled with references to heavily redacted programs. A document titled Incident Report, Prague, 1985, caught her attention. Emma's hand shook as she opened it. The report was full of jargon and black text, but a few words caught her attention: disturbances, high-value targets, operational losses. She scanned the page until her eyes landed on the descriptive sentence at the bottom. Subject: Harper exhibits signs of post-mission cardiac arrest. Termination of active duty pending review. Emma's heart hurried. Was her mother considered to be of a heart condition? Enough of the power? What happened in Prague that left a scar on his mother's life? The more he read, the more questions he had. Samuel, looking intently, stopped talking. He said, "Prague was the turning point in your mother's life." He didn't say exactly, but I know that was when he decided to leave. Everything that happened there, it shattered his confidence in the project. Emma looked at him, her eyes shining with sadness and regret. "How do you know this?" she asked, her voice not quite clear. "You keep saying you're close to my mother, but how? Are you one of them?" Samuel hesitated, unable to speak. Finally he said, "I wasn't part of that plan. But I know. After your mother left, we met again. She trusted me because I knew what it meant to give up something like that." "You still won't tell me?" "It's not my job," Samuel said calmly. "Your mother is very protective of you. She wants you to get away from everything and be happy. I respect her wishes." Emma turned to look at the file, her emotions a mixture of anger, sadness, and determination. He took out another letter, this time in the handwriting of James Harper. This letter he wrote to his mother was written shortly after the events in Prague. "Emily, I know you're scared, and I know you doubt everything. But please, don't go. We've gone too far to stop. This plan is wrong, but it's what we do. Go, they'll see it as a betrayal, and they won't let you go. For your safety and Emma's, stay." Emma felt sick at the thought of her mother leaving. She looked at Samuel, her voice trembling. Do you think they'll come looking for him?" Samuel's voice darkened. "It's possible," he said. "Your mother was careful. She changed her name, moved to a new town, and cut ties with everyone connected to the conspiracy. But even so, he didn't feel safe. He was always worried that they would find him." Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. "Do you think he knows me? Do you think I'm one of the reasons he ran away?" "I think you're the reason they are doing everything," he said. "He didn't just leave to protect himself. He left to protect you." Her mother's life, her choices, her sacrifices, all driven by a fierce love for Emma and a relentless quest to protect her. But as Emma learns more, she also realizes that her mother endured to protect her from the inevitable truth. He picked up the leather book again and turned to the middle page. The book was short, but the message inside shocked Emma. "If something happened to me, Emma had to know why I chose it. He had to prepare for what was coming." Emma held her breath as she read the words. Her mother knew she was in trouble and would probably continue to suffer in the past. And now that her mother was dead, the burden fell on Emma's shoulders. She looked at Samuel and closed her mouth. "If they are still out there, if this project is still going on, I need to know," she said. "I need to understand why I got so angry at my mother and why she felt compelled to get up." Samuel's gaze showed respect for her decision. Then we'll keep digging, he said. But remember, Emma, every answer you seek will only lead to more questions. Emma nodded, her resolve growing stronger. Her mother had left her a legacy of strength and courage, and now it was Emma's turn to carry on that legacy. Whatever truths she discovered along the way. Emma's mind was awash with questions, stronger than ever. The deeper she delved into her mother's life, the more she realized how little she knew. The files, letters, and photos are like pieces of a great puzzle. It's still a puzzle with missing pieces. If her mother's life is a battlefield of secrets and sacrifices, Emma is determined to uncover the truth, no matter what the cost. Samuel stood nearby and watched as Emma examined the contents of the box. His presence was calm and steady, like an anchor holding him steady. That's enough for now. He pulled out another folder. The envelope was sealed and marked with a single word, confidential. Emma opened the envelope carefully, her heart pounding. There is also a letter inside, but this one was not written by his mother. The handwriting is distinct, sharp, and somewhat formal. It seems likely that Emily Harper, the subject of, remained a thoughtful person after she left the program. Investigation revealed that she had begun a new life under the name. All known ties to her former clients are said to have been severed. She appears to be trying to remain secretive despite her actions, and her knowledge of covert operations remains relevant to the Harper Project. Provides more monitoring. Sign. Director Caldwell. Emma's blood ran cold. Spy? They were watching him. They didn't stop after he left, either. 4444 Samuel's eyes went dark. He said, "This is exactly what I was worried about. Your mother always suspected they were still looking for her, but she wanted to ensure your safety by keeping a low profile." Her hands trembled as Emma placed the letter in her hands. During the silent years they had spent together, he had to endure the thought of his mother being watched. But what frightened him most was that they might still be watching him right now. "Do you think they're still out there?" he asked, his voice firm. "Do you think they understand me?" Samuel hesitated, lowering his head but unable to decipher it. "It's possible," he said cautiously. "Your mother left the project long ago, but organizations like this don't disappear. If the Harper Project still existed, they might consider this a perfect ending." Emma showed up with a lump in her stomach. "The ending is weak," he repeated bitterly. "Is this all I have for them?" Chapter 4444, "No," Samuel said firmly. "To them, you may be the end of your life. But to your mother, you are her world. That's why he did everything he could to keep it secret and protect you." I looked at the letter and my jaw dropped. He said nervously, "If they are still here, I need to know who they are. I wonder what they want." The next few hours were a whirlwind of research and discovery. Emma and Samuel searched through the remaining files, gathering all the information they could about Harper's plans. The program appears to have been a covert operation, conducted under the shadow of government agencies and special operations. Its purpose is unclear, but documents indicate it involves experimentation, mind alteration, and high-level espionage. Name as it appears in the document, Director A. Caldwell. Whoever Caldwell was, they helped run the scheme, and oversaw his mother's activities. Emma leaned against the basement wall, exhaustion washing over her. "Caldwell," he grumbled. "If they're the ones watching them, then they know something too." 4444 Samuel nodded. "That's information," he said. "But if you really want to get to the bottom of this, you have to be careful. People like Caldwell don't leave a paper trail. If you start exploring their world, they'll know." Emma's determination didn't waver. "I want them to know I'm here to find out." A smile appeared on Samuel's lips, and his eyes sparkled with interest. "You're more like your mother than you think," he said. She never looked back. Emma looked at the papers beside her. They revealed the remains of her mother's life. She felt a wave of determination wash over her, a fire burning in her chest. For years her mother had avoided her, hidden her, and protected her. Now it was Emma's turn to rise. He looked at Samuel with a confident look. "Let's start with." Samuel stepped forward, his eyes determined. "Let's find Caldwell first," he said. "If he were still alive, he would have the answers you need, but it won't be easy, Emma. Once you enter their land, there is no going back." Emma nodded, gritting her teeth. And just like that, Emma took her first step out of the shadow of her mother's past, determined to uncover the truth no matter what. Also, he would no longer fear the shadow that hung over his family. If there are remnants of the Harper Project, if Chief A. Caldwell is still alive, Emma wants to find them and demand the answers her mother has kept from her for so long. The first step is research. Emma and Samuel return to the study, where they examine every document, letter, and photograph they can find. A. Caldwell's name has appeared frequently in official memos and reports, always linked to oversight and decision-making in the program. But finding someone who deliberately erased their tracks is not easy. "People like Caldwell leave no trace," Samuel said thoughtfully, looking through a pile of papers. "If they are still alive, they'll be buried deep, maybe even under new identities." Emma frowned, her eyes fixed on the edited memory. "But they work in the dark," he said. "People like that don't just disappear. They leave an impact, connection, even if they don't mean to. We just need to find them." Samuel nodded, a glint of agreement in his eyes. "You're right," he said. "And if Caldwell wants to be as important as these documents, he needs partners, resources, and that's where we start." Hours turn into days as Emma and Samuel examine files containing names, places, and events with various references. The more they dig, the more patterns emerge. Certain names kept popping up, people who had been connected to the program in some small way, but who seemed to disappear from the public record around the same time her mother left. One name stands out, Dr. Lenore Grayson. Her name is listed as Chief Behavioral Specialist, and she was involved in psychological evaluations for Project Harper operatives, including her mother. Unlike Caldwell, Dr. Grayson wasn't completely erased from the record. A quick online search reveals that he retired from his position at a research institute 10 years ago and now lives in a quiet town near Seattle. "It could be," Emma said, her heart pounding as she stared at the screen. "If Grayson is working closely with Caldwell, he might be able to find out where they are, or at least what happened to them." Samuel leaned over and read the reports. "That's a remote possibility," he said. "But it's the best lead we have." Emma stood, her resolve unwavering. "Then we'll go to Seattle." The trip to Seattle was uneventful, the intensity of what they were about to see beyond Emma and Samuel. As they approached the address given to Dr. Dow Grayson, Emma felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The house was simple, set on a tree-lined street. It was a place where one might get lost. Emma hesitated at the door, her hand around the bell. "What if he doesn't want to talk to us?" she said, looking at Samuel. "Then we'll tell him why it's important," Samuel said. "But remember, Emma, he might be scared. People involved in such a program don't always speak easily." Emma bent down, getting ready. She rang the bell and a soft voice came from ahead. Moments later, the door opened to reveal an elderly woman with sharp eyes and braided hair in a beautiful kitchen. His voice is respectful but curious. "Yes?" asked the woman, her voice cracked. "Dr. Grayson?" Emma said, her voice calm even though her heart was racing. "My name is Emma. I am Emily Harper's daughter." The woman's face was cold, her eyes slightly glazed. For a moment Emma thought she would slam the door, but she opened it, her eyes fixed on Samuel before turning back to Emma. She paused. "Emily's daughter, I never thought." She drew back, then straightened, her expression softening. "Why are you here?" Emma hesitated, searching for the right words. "I'm trying to understand," he said. "About your mother, about the program she attended. I know I worked with her, and I think you watched her for a long time too." Her language was unreadable as she moved. He said, "Come in. But be prepared. The answer you seek may not be what you want to hear." Inside, the house was beautiful but unremarkable. Dr. Grayson led them into a small living room, where he showed them where to sit. "Emily Harper," he said, his voice heavy with something Emma couldn't place, regret, perhaps, or sadness. "She was one of the best employees we ever had. The beauty, the strength, the fearlessness. But she was also human. She cared so much. This is what made him unique and dangerous. Emma leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the older woman. "How dangerous is it?" he asked. Dr. Grayson sighed. He began to question why we do this, who we serve. Many employees don't ask questions. They obeyed the law. But Emily couldn't get over the pangs of her conscience. Emma sighed. "That's like a mother, loyal at any cost." "What about Caldwell?" Samuel intervened. "Didn't Caldwell give those orders?" Dr. Grayson's speech was dark. "Caldwell was the engineer on the Harper project," he said. "Brilliant mind, but cruel heart. To Caldwell, workers were just tools, until the end." Emily's departure was seen as a betrayal. Caldwell's dedication didn't come easy. Emma felt a chill on her back. "Do you know where the Caldwells are now?" he asked. Dr. Grayson had stepped back to the window, his eyes scanning the invisible audience. "I haven't been to that world in years," he said. "But if the Caldwells were still alive, they simply didn't exist. People like the Caldwells wouldn't get into trouble, they'd find new ways to hide." Emma crossed her arms, despair welling up in her. "I need to find them," he said. "I need to understand why you didn't let him go. Why were you looking at him?" He tore off a piece of paper and handed it to Emma. "This is the last address I left for Caldwell," he said. "It's too late, but it might give you a place to start. Be careful, Emma. If you dig too deep, you might not like what you find." Emma took the book, her heart pounding. "Thank you," she said. "I want to know the truth. I hope you're ready." With a new leader, Emma leaves home with Samuel, more determined than ever. Caldwell's hunt isn't over yet, but he's closer than he thought. As the shadow of her mother's past looms, Emma finds herself caught up in. The world tests his courage, his determination, and everything he thought he knew. The scrap of paper in Emma's pocket was charred and felt too heavy to ignore. Caldwell's name appears throughout his journey, seemingly at the center of every painful and unanswered question in his life. As she and Samuel left Dr. Grayson's quiet home, Emma couldn't help but repeat the old lady's words, "Be careful, you might not like what you see." The address Dr. Grayson pointed to was a few hours away in an affluent suburb. "This is not a house, but a mailbox in a vacant lot in a shopping center." Samuel stopped the car and they sat in silence for a while, staring at the house. "Mailbox, a box," Emma said quietly, "that's not much knowledge." Samuel nodded. "It's a start," he said. "People like Caldwell don't give up easily. If this box has been working lately, it might be of some help to us." Emma nodded, firmly in response to her decision. She entered the post office and approached the counter, where an elderly clerk greeted her with a smile. "What can I do for you?" "How are you today?" she asked. Emma looked back at Samuel, who nodded encouragingly. He took a deep breath and held up the paper with the box number on it. "I'm trying to contact the person who rented the box," he said. "It's very important." The secretary frowned and spoke carefully. "I'm sorry, but we can't disclose that kind of information. Privacy policy." Emma felt a little disappointed. "Please do so," he said firmly. "It's a family matter. I don't want to invade their privacy. I need to know if they are still using it." "Well," he said quietly, "I can't give you any details, but I can tell you if the box still works." "I wish I could." The writer disappeared for a moment, but when he returned, he nodded. "Box 1432 is still in use," he said, "I can tell you that." Emma greeted him with a heart-pounding greeting as he returned to the car. The confirmation that the box was still working gave him hope. If the box was still being used by Caldwell, or someone connected to them, it meant it could still be found. Emma and Samuel decided to wait. If Caldwell, or someone connected to him, came and wrote, they could track them down and find out how to get to where they were. It wasn't a stupid plan, but it was the best option they had. They sat in the car, watching the post office from afar, and time was ticking by. Emma's mind was full of questions. What kind of person would Caldwell be? Was he as cold and calculating as the report said? Or had time softened them, reduced them to remnants of a past they were unwilling to confront? It was not until late in the afternoon that Emma noticed movement. A sleek black car with ink-stained windows pulled into the parking lot. A tall man in a black coat and a hat that hid his face appeared. They walked purposefully into the post office and returned a few minutes later with a small stack of envelopes. "It must be them," Emma said, her voice low but urgent. Samuel nodded. "Just like him. Let's see where they're going." They waited until the car left the parking lot and followed the safety instructions. The little car headed through the slums and toward the outskirts of the city. Finally, it turned onto a narrow, tree-lined road that led to a gated community. The gate opened and the car disappeared into the driveway. Emma and Samuel parked the car not far from here, among the trees. From the doorway, Emma could see the outline of the mansion, its windows gleaming in the failing light. "What now?" Emma asked aloud. Samuel considered the question for a moment. "We're watching," he said. "Let's see if anyone comes or goes. When the time comes, we will seek ways to get closer to each other." The mansion was quiet at night. Emma and Samuel waited until the house lights went out before going to the door. Samuel studied the lock, his movements quick and skillful. After a while, the door opened and they went in. The path leading to the house was lined with tall bushes that cast long shadows in the moonlight. When they reached the door, Emma's heart was racing, her nerves on edge. Samuel waved him back, and he looked around, then nodded. "That's obvious," he said. "Let's go." Emma hesitated, then followed him to the door. Samuel knocked hard, the sound echoing in the silent night. There was no answer for a long time. Then the door slowly opened. A figure stood in the shadows, their face partially obscured by the dim light from inside. They stepped forward, and Emma's breath caught. It was an older man, his features sharp and weathered, his eyes cold and calculating. "Who are you?" the man demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Emma stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I'm Emma Harper," she said. "Emily Harper's daughter. And I'm here for answers." The man's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Emily's daughter," he murmured. He straightened, his gaze piercing. "You shouldn't have come here." Emma's fists clenched. "Maybe not," she said. "But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth." The man looked at him for a long time, then stepped back and motioned for him to come in. "Since you've come this far," he said loudly, "then you should know." Emma and Samuel looked at each other, then went in. The door closed behind them, making Emma shiver. Whatever truth awaited her, she was ready to face it. The room was heavy, without trembling or fear. Emma's eyes wandered around the dimly lit courtyard, admiring the simple decor. The walls were lined with bookshelves, each filled with neatly arranged volumes, and the air smelled faintly of old wood and leather. He followed the man into the house, and Samuel walked quietly beside him, his presence reassuring. The man, Caldwell, had led them to an excellent lesson. A table lamp illuminated the room, long shadows dancing on the walls. Caldwell asked them to sit down, but Emma hesitated, her nerves frayed. Samuel just stood there, his eyes fixed on the old man. Caldwell sat at his desk, arms folded, reading Emma with great interest. "Emily Harper," he said in a low, measured voice. "I never thought I'd hear that name again, let alone see his daughter standing in front of me." 44, Emma hugged back, her resolve growing stronger. "You know him," he said, his voice calm despite his inner turmoil. "You're his boss. You're responsible for overseeing the work he does." Caldwell nodded slightly, smiling slightly. "I know him," he said. "Harper's plan was my creation. Emily is one of our assistants, smart, intelligent, and completely dedicated. Until he stopped being that way, of course." Emma felt anger boil in her chest. "You mean until he realizes what you're doing," she replied. "Until he sees the lies, the deceit, and the dangers you've put him through." Caldwell's expression darkened and his smile disappeared. You speak as if you know the whole story, he said. But I promise you, you won't. Your mother was a great asset, but she made a choice, a selfish one, I might add. She left her job, her team, and everything we had built together. She left to protect me, Emma said. To protect myself from the twisted games you play. For a moment, Caldwell said nothing, his eyes fixed on her. Then he leaned back in his chair and clenched his fists tightly. You're so lucky, he said, almost laughing. The way they are. But passion without knowledge is a dangerous thing, Emma. If you want answers, you must be willing to hear the truth, no matter how hard it is. Emma's heart pounded as Caldwell began to speak. His voice was calm, his words thoughtful, as if each of them was carrying the weight of a story too heavy for them to bear. The Harper Project never looked at anyone, he said. It was about the message. The agents we trained, including your mother, were instruments designed to achieve a specific goal. Espionage, counterintelligence, mind manipulation. They are the best of the best, chosen for their skills and abilities. And because they went beyond the process, Samuel interjected in a low, sharp voice. Caldwell looked at him but didn't deny it. They were given a choice, to go in or to stay. Emily decided to go along and moved on for years. But then Prague came. Emma's stomach turned. What happened in Prague? She asked. What was so scary that you left everything? Caldwell's voice was strong, he said directly, Prague was defeated. The project was scuttled due to lack of intelligence and lack of execution, he said. We lost a good man, and your mother also blames herself. She wasn't directly responsible, but she couldn't handle the loss. It took something away from her, her determination, her loyalty to the program. She leaned forward, her eyes burning. Then the trouble began. He wants to know who we really serve, and why we make decisions. He doesn't like the results. He punches Emma. Because you lied to him, he says. You used him. Caldwell lies down. He says, it can be done. But the world isn't black and white, Emma. It's gray. And sometimes, for the greater good, sacrifices must be made. Emma shook her head, her anger burning. You took advantage of them, her voice trembled. You used them all. When he tried to leave, you pushed him away. You never left him. Caldwell pursed his lips in a small line. It's a responsibility, he said quietly. He knew a lot and he didn't want to be silent. We need to watch him for the safety of the program and everyone involved. Emma took a deep breath, the weight of his words falling on her like a guiding blanket. You didn't just follow him, he said quietly. You ruined his life. He looked over his shoulder for years, afraid you would see him. But here you are, he said. Prove that his sacrifices were not in vain. He protected you, giving you a life free from his burdens. But now you had entered his world. The question is, what will you do? He said. The room fell silent, the weight of Caldwell's words hanging heavy in the air. Emma's mind raced, a whirlwind of emotions shaking her. She thought of her mother, the strength and courage and pain she had endured to protect Emma. Now, as Emma stood face to face with the man who had caused her so much pain, she felt her resolve unwavering. I will finish where he left off, he said himself. I'll make sure that what he went through never happens to anyone again. Caldwell's expression changed slightly, and he whispered something Emma couldn't understand, perhaps respect, or pity. That's a harsh word, he said. But be careful, Emma. The path you are taking is not dangerous. The people who participate in programs like the Harper Project are not going to disappear. If you dig too deep, you might not like what you find. He stood up to signal the end of the conversation. Then I hope you are ready for what is to come, he said. Because once you start, there's no going back. As Caldwell led her to the door, Emma felt a mixture of anger, determination, and unhappiness. The answer he got raised another question, and the road ahead was full of uncertainty. But one thing is clear, his journey is far from over. The night outside was cool and peaceful, the sky dotted with stars. Emma and Samuel returned to the car in silence, the weight of the conflict still weighing on their shoulders. 44. Samuel was the first to break the silence. "It's dangerous," he said. "But you stood your ground." Emma nodded, looking ahead. "I should do this," he said. "For my mother. Mine. Will is not the end. This is the beginning. There is more, Samuel. The more people there are, the more truths there are. I won't stop until I see them. Because..." Facing Caldwell leaves Emma with more questions than answers. When she finally learns about her mother's life in the Harper Project, the truth remains murky. Caldwell had given him a warning, a startling reminder that the path he was on would produce things he was not ready to face. But Emma had made her decision. You will see this till the end. Over the next few weeks, Emma and Samuel followed all the instructions they received. Old communications, unpublished documents, and whispers in obscure online forums all point to the final piece of the puzzle. This isn't about Caldwell or Project Harper. There was something bigger and worse that her mother knew about and was trying to protect Emma from. One name kept popping up in my searches. This is the Alios Foundation. It was a private organization that operated under the radar, claiming to fund research and innovation. But the more Emma digs, the clearer it becomes that the foundation is connected to shady activities, including Project Harper. Samuel found the location of the foundation headquarters. A house far up the mountain. Although it was registered as a research institute, Emma felt it meant more. It is the key to everything. The road to Alios' house is long and difficult. The road winds through dense forest and the air gets colder as we climb higher into the mountains. Emma looked out the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of anticipation and fear. Samuel drove in silence, his presence a source of comfort. As they approached the house, Emma stopped breathing. The house is clean and modern, a contrast to the rugged country landscape. A high fence and security cameras surround the perimeter, a clear sign that the Alios Foundation takes privacy seriously. Samuel parked his car far away and walked slowly so as not to be seen. As they approached, Emma felt her muscles tighten. That was it. It was the end of everything she had been looking for. They found a door on the side that allowed them to bypass the security system thanks to Samuel's knowledge. The inside of the house was cold and dark, and the streets were quiet. Emma's heart pounded as they entered deeper into the house, echoing their footsteps. In the middle of the house is a large, secure room called the Vault. It took several minutes to open the door, but when it finally did, Emma was trapped. It included rows of bookshelves, computer workstations, and shelves filled with documents. Emma and Samuel worked quickly, figuring out what was happening with their mother or the Harper Project. It wasn't long before they found a file labeled, Harper, Emily. Emma opened the file with shaking hands and scanned the pages with her eyes. The file compiled her mother's mission, her psychological evaluation, and her decision to leave the program. But what caught Emma's attention was the final report written shortly after her mother's departure. Subject Harper has information about a study that could interfere with the Foundation's mission. While the investigation into her was successful, the decision to remove her from the program posed a threat. She read the words, "They want to get rid of her," she whispered, her voice shaking. "She's more than a liability. He is a threat." Samuel put his hand on her shoulder. "They failed," he said. "He is smarter than they are. He is protecting you." Emma nodded, her eyes burning with tears as she turned the pages and saw something that took her breath away, a letter from her mother. The letter was written shortly before her mother died. "Dear Emma, if you are reading this letter, then you have seen the truth. I know this journey has not been easy, and I am sorry that it has been a burden on you. But I want you to understand one thing: everything I do, everything I choose, is for you. Emma, you are stronger than you think. It is now up to you to decide what to do with this information. You have the power to expose them and make sure no one else suffers like this. But whatever you choose, know that I am happy for you. I cannot express my love for you in words. Mother." For a moment, he took care of her so that she would do everything she could to protect him. Finally, Emma made a decision. She compiled the evidence they had gathered and presented it anonymously to investigative reporters, allowing the truth to be conveyed to the public without her suffering the direct consequences of her actions. She knew her mother wanted her to find a balance between honesty and self-preservation. Months passed, and revelations about the Alios Foundation and the Harper Project began to appear in the media. Whistleblowers came forward, an investigation began, and the shadow that had haunted her mother's life was finally revealed. For Emma, this trip brought about a profound change. She uncovered the truth about her mother's life, faced unimaginable dangers, and became stronger. Her mother's legacy is no longer a secret, it is a source of strength, reminder of the courage and love that define her. As Emma stood on her porch one night, gazing up at the stars, she felt a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, "You are stronger than you know." And for the first time, Emma truly believed. A stranger's knock in the middle of the night marked the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. And now, as Emma looks to the future, she knows she is ready for whatever comes. Emma stood on her porch, gazing up at the stars, as the burden of her journey turned into a quiet determination. Her mother's devotion, courage, and unwavering love paved Emma's path, leading her to uncover long-hidden truths. Although the scars of her past will never fully heal, Emma feels stronger than she thought. Her mother's life story has become the foundation of her own, a legacy of resilience, courage, and purpose. Emma's journey may be over, but the message she carries touches us all. How many secrets are hidden, waiting to be revealed? How many untold stories shape lives in ways we can't imagine? If Emma's story has inspired you, don't let it stop you. Take time to reflect on your own life. Is there a truth you've been avoiding? Is there a legacy you haven't honored? And most importantly, remember, knowledge is power, but it also comes with responsibility. If you've ever felt the urge to seek the truth, let that be your signal to take the first step. It may not be easy, but as Emma's story shows, the journey is always worth it. At Lord Ethan Stories, we believe in the power of storytelling to connect, inspire, and empower. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What? Do you have a story of your own to share? Let's build a community of courage, curiosity, and connection.